Hello, and welcome to another edition of Public Affairs Public Access, where we discuss issues of philosophy and political science and politics from basically a libertarian viewpoint. Time permitting, we can take some questions from the viewing audience at the end of the show. I am your host, David Excuse me, I'm your host, David Hutzelman, and I am honored today to have a guest who's come into town for a number of purposes, but he is Professor Stephen Hicks. He is the professor of philosophy at Rockford College. It's a college of about 1,600 students in Illinois. Stephen is a professor of philosophy. He is also the executive director of the Center for Business and Entrepreneurship, as well as he is a nationally recognized scholar on objectivism, which is basically the philosophy that Ayn Rand has outlined and detailed in many of her novels and tracts. So welcome to Houston, Stephen. Good to have you here.
Thanks, David.
Okay. You have a very interesting bunch of things on your plate these days, so
yeah,
maybe you could tell us a little bit about your setting up the Center for Business, Ethics and Entrepreneurship, and where you hope to go with that particular organization.
Right. And it came out of a couple of interests of mine. Business ethics is a long-standing area of interest. I've taught courses in that over the years and published quite a bit. But I find business ethics to be an especially fascinating field because we live in very dynamic business times. What we consider the modern business world in many respects would be unrecognizable to people 2 centuries ago, 4 centuries ago, and so forth. If you think that for tens of thousands of years human beings lived in hunter-gatherer economies, right, or small-scale subsistence farming, or even the most sophisticated civilizations, high feudal societies, business would have been done, but not in a form that is recognizable to the modern business world. So what we have is the development of all sorts of high-tech, innovative ways of doing business. We now routinely do business with people all over the world. And that's a change from typically doing business with people on a face-to-face basis. Starting in the 19th century and the 20th century, we started to have people of different races and different ethnicities regularly working together, people of different sexes working together. And so that changes the complexion in many cases in the way in which we do business. Plus also we have the development of new business forms. All sorts of corporate forms have come into existence. Plus, of course, what's going on in the business world, all this incredibly dynamic, original stuff that's going on. So it's a very exciting field to be focused on. But also, anytime you've got human beings doing innovative stuff, new stuff that's never been done before, there's always questions about what's the right way to do it, what's the wrong way to do it. And in many cases, there's not an answer in the back of the book. So we're having to figure out, say, for example, in financial markets and all of the new instruments there, what exactly is this instrument? How does it work? What are the long-term impacts going to be? And there are lots of interesting ethics questions. So as I mentioned, that's been a long-standing interest of mine. Now, the entrepreneurship side of it is a more recent interest. Economists are starting just recently, I would say in the last generation, to take entrepreneurship more seriously as an economic phenomenon. We can talk more about the economic theory if you're interested. But I find it interesting because if you look at the question of what makes entrepreneurs tick, why some people are more creative, more proactive, have more initiative, how they in effect take something out of nothing and build up these magnificent enterprises, taking on the risks and all of the energy that goes into it. They're in many cases very dynamic people and fascinating. So I was interested in how they work, what attracts someone to becoming an entrepreneur as opposed to going to work for someone else, what makes successful entrepreneurship happen, and then broader political economic questions. So the idea for me was to integrate my interests with business ethics with entrepreneurship, which is also a very exciting field. I like also that they cross disciplinary boundaries. So I'm a philosopher by training, but then that means I do talk with economists and business professionals and business academics, but a center devoted to ethically informed entrepreneurship it's new, but it also enables us to talk about lots of very interesting cutting-edge issues.
So do you sponsor conferences, or what mechanism for the center working?
Primarily what the center did in its first 4 or 5 years was sponsor a lot of new courses and revampings of courses at my college. So for example, we didn't really have entrepreneurship courses per se. We were a traditional liberal arts college. So we sponsored course development, or sponsoring courses in American economic history, but playing up the entrepreneurial angle, or having courses that are explicitly about ethics and entrepreneurship, a new kind of business ethics course. So we did a lot of that. What we also did was bring guest speakers in, which are typically expensive, people who are successful entrepreneurs or successful professors in some business ethics or entrepreneurship related field, have them come give a talk to the students, but also have them hang around, so they go out to lunch with students and so forth. What we've also been doing is in our publication, Kaizen, which comes out 4 or 5 times a year, I will typically do an extended interview with a successful entrepreneur. And what we're interested in is what their business was, and so I'm interviewing entrepreneurs in widely different fields. We've done sports and marketing and finance and venture capital and so on. Some in high tech, some agriculture. So what's their story? How did they do what they did? What was their new thing? But then also a lot of those business lessons can be very abstractly presented. What we found is that students really like to know about real people. And so if you have a real person who has been successful, and you get a sense of this as a real person, engage with issues and struggling sometimes and failing in others and bouncing back and then achieving success, it's a very human story, and then students relate to that. And that then enables them to learn some business lessons about what it takes to be successful in business, how to be more creative in their ideas, but then also a lot of issues about character. That's the ethics side coming out, because in many cases people fail in business, in entrepreneurship, in life, not because they don't have good ideas, but there are various things that hold them back, right, on the character side.
What are some of those issues?
In many cases, we all struggle, for example, with procrastination, right, or laziness, right? So we know that we should be doing something, and that it's to our advantage to get to it, but we don't suck it up, so to speak, and get off the sofa, right?
That's an ethical issue then?
Well, it is. That's
really?
right. Yeah, it's to put it in high ethics language, it would be a failure of integrity, right? To say, right, if you know that you should be doing something but you don't do it, then there's a breach between what you know and what you do. Another issue is a courage issue. So in many cases, people fail because they look at something and it looks risky. And of course, much of life involves being able to face risk. And when we're aware of risk, and we have to be aware of risks, we can't just blind ourselves to it, but being aware of the risks brings fear with it. And how do you deal with fear and then nonetheless do what you need to do? That's another character issue. So in many cases, not having developed courage, right, will do so. So there are any number of ways in which it follows through.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit different view of ethics than most people
That's
have.
right. Oh, that's a big part of what we're doing here. Business ethics has, in some respects, a bad reputation, and I think a deservedly bad reputation, because the field, and while it's a relatively young field, has almost always focused on the negative, right? You know, don't do this, right? Don't do all these bad things. And what
it's usually a prescription for more regulation of
right,
some sort
or that
other,
might
so
be the thing, or the idea, right, that what goes on naturally and most of the time in the business world is people trying to, excuse my language, but screw each other over, right? And do bad things to each other and cut corners and cheat and defraud, right, and so on. And so those are the cases that get the most attention. And this, I think, is a legitimate part, right, of business ethics, because people do bad things, and not doing bad things is certainly part of business ethics. But I think the more important part of business ethics, or any kind of ethics, is not focusing on the bad, but focusing on the good. The question of ethics is, what is the good, right, and how do we achieve the good? Or for me as an individual, how do I achieve the good? Right? The big question philosophically is, what is the meaning of life? And what we want is to know, what are the most important values in life, and make sure that I really am focusing my life on the important things on life, not just avoiding the bad things, but actually achieving the good things. What does it take for me as an individual to become the kind of person who can succeed, right, in life? So,
sort of a very heroic view of
well, it can be
business,
heroic, right? Because if you at least try to do the best you can do, some people will, and they will do things that surprise themselves, and they will do things that surprise everybody else, and then we do start talking about heroes. But at all levels of achievement, for each of us to be focusing on what really is genuinely valuable in our lives, whatever level of talent we have, striving to achieve that, that is what I think primarily ethics should be about. So, ethics is not about, not lying and not hitting people and not being lazy, right, and so forth, all of the negative things. It's about figuring out what your life is going to be about and getting out there and doing so. So if we turn to business, right, in particular, I mean, in one respect, it should be an obvious fact that the vast majority of transactions, right, 9,999 out of 10,000 transactions, are positive transactions, right? People trade with each other. They're both happy. They shake hands. They say thank you, and they walk away in a mutually beneficial situation. How that happens, and how we can take that for granted in the business world, that is a major achievement. Right? The fact, for example, that I could, now that I'm visiting down here in Houston, go to into a banking institution, and those people have no idea who I am. Right? Just give them a little piece of plastic, and they'll give me $1,000, right, and walk away. I can walk away.
Right. Is this how the issue of trust kind
that's
of
the issue of
permeates
trust. That's right.
The
So,
society in a...
that's right. And in one respect, we take for granted the level of trust that we have accomplished in our modern business society in examples like that. And it's nice that we can take that for granted, that we have these high institutions of trust, but that's a positive thing. It really is actually a wonderful thing. And what goes into establishing that cultural norm of trust and having it so institutionalized, and of course passing it on to our kids and the next generation so that we can continue to build on that, I think, just as one example, this trust issue is one positive ethics thing that we should be focusing on.
That even transcends people you wouldn't normally even like to associate with.
Sure.
The trust comes into that relationship. I know there's many people have said that what's holding the African economy back is the issue of trust, because it's so tribal that nobody from one tribe will trust another person to, to do business with somebody from another tribe.
Right.
And I guess it goes back to hunter-gathering groups and the fact that modern society now is so complex that the issue of trust is becoming a much more, actually it's a competitive advantage for those societies that are able to cultivate large amounts of trust.
Absolutely. So Africa and much of Africa and other parts of the world are on the development edge. You can see that they are where the more developed nations of the world were a century ago or 2 centuries ago, because much of European history, for example, is the exact same pattern, where you have tribes and clans and competing ethnic groups across any number of dimensions, and they don't like each other, they don't trust each other, and most of the history of their time is warring and squabbling and trying to take their stuff from each other, and a zero trust society. So the fact that in significant parts of the world, in a relatively brief amount of time, a century or two, most of those ethnic groups and different religious groups now work peacefully with each other and trade billions of euros, right, on a regular basis, and they like each other, and they celebrate, right, the cosmopolitanism. That is an enormous cultural, moral achievement, and we should be focusing on more what makes that happen. So positive ethics is one of the themes as opposed to negative ethics. It's also partly why I like to focus on entrepreneurship a lot. And one of my projects within business ethics is to refocus much of the business ethics field away from a corporation-focused model, where again, corporations are one of the huge success stories of the 20th century business world. But much of business ethics kind of takes for granted that somehow corporations just come into exist, and there are these large operations, and then they have these complicated social structures and issues, right, that are going on. But I think the more interesting issue is that every corporation, no matter how big it is, starts as an entrepreneurial venture. And how it gets off the ground and then grows successfully or fails to grow into a corporate venture or a large-scale venture, most often in corporate form, that's interesting. So rather than just saying, well, somehow corporations are here and then dealing with the issues, well, where did it come from? And that takes you back to entrepreneurship. So
yeah, I think there's a pervasive, maybe naive, progressive epistemology that just posits that, well, human progress is always going to happen. It's just something we take for granted, and we don't need to worry about what particular system we're all living under. This progress is going to happen regardless, and therefore our job is, like the problem of production has been solved. We just need to figure out a way to distribute it.
Okay,
now.
yeah.
So,
in a way, that's a very modern attitude, that idea, not only that progress is possible, but that's the normal state for humankind, and then the stronger form that you just mentioned, that in some sense it's inevitable.
yeah.
That came into existence right in the 19th century, and in one significant respect, I do think that that is an achievement. That's something to be celebrated, because for most of human history, the dominant view either was that human beings are just always going to be right in this particular state of existence where 90% of the population is in poverty, right, and we have these different groups, and life is short, and then you die, and you just suck it up, and that's no prospect for significant improvement. So getting past that, I think that's a great thing. Or the other major view is a thesis of decline, that in some sense human history is going downhill, right? That there were the good old days, right? There were the days of real heroes and giants, the Greek gods, right? Or human beings were in a Garden of Eden, and then everything since then has been going downhill, 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 right? And every generation is worse, and so forth. But you're right. The follow-up issue is that progress should not be taken as automatic, right, or inevitable. I think part of certainly academic work, but even for the average person who's a working member of society, some understanding of what makes achievement possible, what makes individual progress possible, what makes cultural progress possible. People should know these things. So they should know something about political systems, right? Some political systems set people up for death, suffering, starvation, mass extermination.
North Korea.
Yeah, that's right. And so people should know that, the political history, and why, broadly speaking, democratic, republican forms of government are awesomely wonderful. They should know something about economics, right, and how markets work. They should know something about religious toleration and culturally liberal attitudes about respecting other people's rights to live their own lives and so forth. It's only once those things come together that you can have a society, right, that progresses. The other part of it, of course, is scientific and technological. We live in an unbelievably progressive science and technological society, and we all enjoy the fruits of that, but that's not inevitable. That takes a lot of failure, a lot of wealth, and then a lot of cultural mechanisms for disseminating.
A lot of coordination, like just reading Leonard Reed's essay of I, Pencil.
Yeah, the updated version of that.
Complicated just to build a pencil is, and how many people have to actually cooperate.
A classic example, yes, perfectly.
In that environment.
So yes, understanding how that happens, I think, is certainly part of for each of us individuals, so that we can appreciate the people who provide us with all of these wonderful things that enrich our lives. And so I do think it is actually a bit of a problem culturally right now that we have so many people who don't have basic technological education or basic scientific education to understand where all of these things come from. So it should be an ongoing cultural product. So it's not just the matter that we have achieved a great deal of wealth, we have achieved a great deal of freedom, we have achieved a great deal of technical sophistication, and somehow all of that's just going to keep happening and all we have to worry about is who gets what goodies. Right. No, we do have to pay attention to where those things come from and what the cultural preconditions are.
Okay. One thing that there seems to be not a whole lot of tolerance for is this process of risk, which of course entrepreneurs are especially good, I guess, at dealing with. But even folks that are maybe not strongly philosophically convinced of free market and individual liberty sometimes can be persuaded by the rationale that progress is only coming on a trial and error basis, and that if we don't have a system that allows people to fail, we'll never discover what progress really is possible. Right. And of course, the more in the economy that you have the government managing it, which even if it does fail, you never know it because they'll just continue to do what they've always done.
The feedback mechanisms in politics are
right, exactly.
For failure are not the same.
So the idea that trial and error and from an entrepreneur standpoint is such a important ingredient that we can't just like progress is not preordained, you can't say, oh yeah, well, in 1960, we need to build a personal computer like an Apple II or something. Nobody even knew enough to have the government get involved with that kind of stuff. So we've got to have people that are willing to take risks, primarily with their own capital, to do that kind of thing.
There are a couple of important things in what you're saying there. One issue is the degree of risk tolerance. Now, to some extent, all of us need to embrace risk in our lives. Anything that we do, from finding a mate and someone to fall in love with, or raise children, or buying a house or a car, or choosing a job or not, they all involve risk, because all of those things can fail. And so being able to step up and take the risk when necessary, right, it's part of the human condition that we need to deal with. But then entrepreneurs, for example, are a clear case of high risk initiatives. And so one of the things that we can do as individuals is make decisions for ourselves in our careers, whether we want to have a high level of risk in our careers or not. And so there's kind of a division of labor, so to speak, of professions, and people who are more willing to take on risk, right, they will become more entrepreneurial. And people who are less interested in risk, they're seeking other things from their careers.
Security, maybe.
Sure, that's right. Or flexibility in their job. Maybe you're a mother and you want to combine a career with motherhood. So flexibility might be more important to you. So, but people, I think, should understand that if they're not pursuing a high-risk profession, that they're making that choice, and they should appreciate that there are other people out there who are taking on the risk of developing these new enterprises as well.
Right. Of course, you only hear about the ones that are famously successful, and then everybody can envy how much this person is making, as opposed to all the people that are failing that you never read about in the newspapers.
Right, that's another issue, which ones you focus on, because most entrepreneurial ventures do not succeed. And I think we do like to focus on the positive cases, because they're more energizing. But then aside from the issue of risk by itself, there's also the issue of creativity and innovation. And that's when you were talking about the discovery process and the trial and error process, that if we're going to have new enterprises and find out what people really want, right, what they really need, how better to satisfy human wants and how better to satisfy human needs, there is no recipe book, right, for doing all of that. Particularly, there is no recipe book in a world that is changing as scientifically and technologically as it is going, and lots of cultural evolution that's going on. So people's needs and wants and aspirations are changing as well. Yes. So the only way to do that is through a great deal of economic trial and error, and this is. To speak from an economics function, this is what entrepreneurs do. Right? They have an idea, they assess the business landscape, they try it out, and sometimes they succeed and sometimes they fail. But what's beautiful, right, about it from an economic perspective is they are investing their own resources or the resources of people that they've gotten voluntarily to invest in them. And then if the experiment goes well, that is to say, they really have figured out how better to satisfy a human need or want, right, or to come up with some new way to do so, then that means lots and lots of people, their lives are better off as a result of what these entrepreneurs are doing, and then the entrepreneurs themselves get a great deal of reward for that. So it's a beautiful win-win. But then also, if the entrepreneur and the entrepreneur's investors turns out they have a bad idea, then they put their resources out there and their time and so forth, and they fail, that is to say, they're not really satisfying human needs and wants, then they go out of business, right? But nobody is harmed, right, by their going out of business. It's a failed experiment, and they bear the risks of, the consequences, rather, of having done so. So it minimizes the risks and so forth.
And government is probably the least feasible way of exploring trial and error, because people won't tolerate political failures the way that economic failures can be.
Well, this then raises a question. We can understand, actually we're starting to understand a whole lot better now, how in a free market that discovery process, trial and error, profit as motivated win-win transactions, how all of that works. And we've seen lots and lots of examples of an enormous success case. Now, of course, the big competitor position to that politically is to say that maybe government should be charged with the responsibility of allocating resources on behalf of society, right, as a whole. And there are a couple of core issues. I mean, the core issue that gets, that I think is fundamental for me as a business ethics person is that when you are talking about free markets, the important part is that they are free. That means all of the transactions that go on in that society, all of the interactions are voluntary. You don't have to deal with anybody. Right? Bill Gates is the richest guy in the world. I don't know if that's still true, right? But he can't make you do anything. He can't make you buy his products for all of his economic power and so on. But anytime you're talking about the government being involved, you are talking about an institution that deals in force, right? It has the power to make people do things or to stop people by force from doing things, right? Every regulation is backed up by the police and it's backed up by the military. So an ethics question here is, when we're making the strategic decision whether to choose markets or to choose government, is, are we going to try to address this issue, whatever it is, through voluntary transactions, or are we going to address this issue through compulsion? And that's a deeply ethically fraught, right, decision, right, to be made.
I think, yeah, that controversy has been kind of popularized too.
But the other side of it then is then to say, well, aside from the compulsion issue, maybe it's the case that the right kind of government management can be more efficient, right, than market management. And that then becomes an empirical matter, right, to a large extent, where we run the experiments, so to say. We see what happens in government-managed economies, and we compare the results with free market-managed economies, and then we judge, right, one way or the other. But then, partly also what you were talking about there, understanding why the empirical evidence almost always goes on the side of the free market case, why governments typically don't do that so well, then you have to understand, right, the incentives of politicians as opposed to the incentives of entrepreneurs, right? The feedback mechanisms that are in place in the political sphere versus the feedback mechanisms that are in place in the economic sphere, right, and so forth. And in both cases, and also the knowledge issue, this is a Hayek point, right? Entrepreneurs are typically boots on the ground, they know the area. Politicians are typically more distant from the scenes. They typically have much cruder data. So yeah, the knowledge issues and incentive issues and feedback mechanism issues typically tilt significantly toward free markets as well.
Yeah, I think many people can look to places like, well, maybe not so much today as a few decades back, Japan and China, and see these highly successful economic ventures, but forget the fact that these people are really just reverse engineering or taking something that's already been discovered and making it more efficiently than it can be made in other places, lots of times because of lower wage rates that they're able to command as well. But they forget the fact that this stuff had to be invented or brought to people's attention somewhere before you can copy it and make the cheapest version of it.
Right. Absolutely. So going back to where the fundamental source of innovation and creativity, right, comes from, and whether governments can provide that better or market entrepreneurs can provide that better, right, that's fundamental. But you're right to point out, I mean, Japan is an interesting mixed case, right, because it's not a case of strong government management nor laissez-faire free markets, right, in the case. It's a mixture, right, and it's been successful in many respects, right, as a mixed economy. And of course, then we could say, well, maybe if the mixture were different, Japan could have been done better, right, than it did, or that Japan is currently facing some longer-term problems, right, as a result of decisions made 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So what are exactly the empirical lessons that we can learn here?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, just the cultural issues of failure, primarily in a Oriental culture. There's much higher penalties associated with failing in that kind of a culture than there are for entrepreneurs, you know, who fail frequently, and it's not looked up to as something.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, in entrepreneurial culture, we really celebrate success, but it's also interesting that we celebrate failure, right? And we encourage people to fail. And so that idea that you should go into it knowing that 9 times out of 10 you're going to fall flat in your face and your ideas aren't going to work out, and that's okay, right? That's a good thing, right? Or celebrating in brainstorming sessions that people are going to come up with crazy out-of-the-box ideas, and encouraging that rather than frowny-faced shutting down people who come up with ideas that don't fit the pre-existing mold, right, and so on. So, yeah, entrepreneurship largely is about celebrating both failure and success.
I think another paradigm that has been brought up in terms of things you were talking about before is the issue of, how was it termed, exit versus voice. In other words, for products that are brought to market, each individual consumer can either exit from that particular product by going to a competitor or not buying it at all. Whereas if you turn that product or that process over to the government, then you're confronted with having to get a majority of your fellow citizens together and have a vote or something that will cause some government-run enterprise or something to change.
Right.
And it won't go away any other way, especially when it can outlaw any competition that comes along.
Right. So in effect, free markets have both exit and voice, right, available to them, because you can complain, and the companies that are interested in success, they do listen very carefully to what their customers are voicing, and if the customer has exited, right, to try to follow that person and say, what went wrong, please come back. But yes, in the case of governments, right, you take the exit option away, right, except in extreme cases where the person just leaves the country. Right. And you only leave voice, and only one kind of voice. Right? So the conversation is very different.
For sure. Well, one of the things that I found interesting on your website, and we should tell, I guess, people that to get more information about the center, they can go to cee@rockford.edu.
Yeah, that's the center's email address.
Oh, that's the okay.
Yeah,
the
CE
email.
at rockford.edu.
Okay. And they can contact you if they.
Sure.
And there's a website as well.
It's just ethicsandentrepreneurship.org.
Oh,
O-R-G.
okay. Very good. All right. Well, one of the things that I did see on that on your website there was a topic which really was kind of eye-opening, because I really had no idea how it would be described, and that's the issue of sports ethics.
Yes.
And so there's some ethical component to sports. Is that in terms of just any sport, or professional sports, or sports that are a business, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. My colleague, Sean Klein, he's a younger PhD in philosophy, is heading up that initiative. He's developed a new course for us at Rockford called Sports Ethics, and it's wildly popular. Mm-hmm. But your question...
All the jocks take it, right?
Well, certainly, yes, that's right. And a lot of people who are interested in athletics or in sports in some respect. But then your question, though, is what conceptually, right, makes this a legitimate field, or what would sports ethics, right, actually, right, be about? Well, a couple of things I think can be said here. If you think about sports is something that is enormously valuable to people, right? Just that people love to participate in sports, and so they're getting some great rewards from the participation.
Or just watch it, yeah.
Or being a spectator. And so there was a question, what is the value here? What buttons, so to speak, are sports pushing, right, in us?
Okay.
Anytime you start talking about important human values, that takes you into ethics, right? But then if you start to study what sports are doing, sports is a stylization with rules and so forth. So it's kind of like life, but it's an artificial life, a little world, right, that you create according to the rules, right, of that particular sports. But built into that is the idea of goals. There are goals that you have to achieve. There is the possibility of success and the possibility of failure. There is the issue of what it takes to be successful, to work hard, to develop your skills, to develop your mental focus, and so on. How to avoid failure, you lose. How you sort of suck it up and don't get down on yourself, don't get down on your teammates. There is the idea of the great satisfaction, right, that we get from achieving our goals. And these start to sound like important human values. That what goes on in sports is things that go on in life, but they are highlighted and stylized, right, and tweaked, right? Success, failure, right? Goals, right? Competition, coming back from adversity, right? Setting high ambition for yourself and striving to be, right, the best you can be. That you see all of that in sports, and I think in that sense, sports is a metaphor for life. And we do see that a lot, right? So in many cases, people who are in business, one of the things that they like when they're hiring young people is to know that that person participated in sports. Because that tells them, right, something about this person. It says this is someone who shows up every day for practice. This is someone who likes competition and maybe can thrive, right, in competition. This is someone who knows what it's like to lose, right, and so forth. And so the participation in sports then is a proxy for other traits about the individual, right, that the person is interested in. Also, if we think about business, we can make analogies between sports and business, because again, we are seeking goals in business, possibility of success and failure, and there's competition, and some people are able to handle it and some people are not able to handle it. So if we're interested in preparing children for life or young people for life, in many cases, sports is a useful vehicle for cultivating, right, those traits. So in many cases, coaches will say, and I think this is one of the things that makes a good coach, being a coach is not about just getting people into good physical condition and teaching them how to do certain physical maneuvers on a field, right, and so forth. But being a good coach is about motivation, right? It's about character. It's about setting goals for yourself. It's about learning how to be working cooperatively, right, with other people. It's about being able to understand the rules of the game, and to think strategically, and to take pride in being successful within the context of those rules of the game and in the competition. And so it's like building human beings through this kind of stylized activity that we call sports.
Okay. See, I guess you can, there's also maybe an issue in terms of, I know there's been a lot, of course, of criticism of games, personal computer type games, but nonetheless, some of those fantasy games require hours and hours of work to accumulate characteristics for your character to be more powerful or succeed in in the environment that's this kind of artificial environment that's been created, which is kind of a focus of the real world. I mean, just another way of looking at it. And it brings out the same kind of things: dedication, focus, willingness to lose or win.
There's lots of failure.
Like that. So yeah, lots of failure.
Right, strategy and memory development. Right.
Yeah.
And it's a whole lot of fun. Right?
Exactly.
And that's what life should be, right?
I agree. Well, there's also I think, an aspect of sports that has gotten some attention from some political philosophers that I know, and that is the societal, what should I say, togetherness that following a sports team actually creates. There's very few ideas that can come into existence and have people, rally the cause around a unifying thing. Right. And yet, with professional sports teams like the Houston Texans are playing in the playoffs this weekend, there's a tremendous following and feeling of, hey, we're all in this together. We're going up to New England and beat those Yankees or something.
Well, that can come in a very positive forms, right, as you're suggesting here. It can also come out in fairly ugly forms, right? So, that it might not be enough that you like the Houston Texans, but part of that is that you have to hate the Dallas Cowboys, right? And then you set people up for friction because they aren't part of the same tribe, right, so to speak. So there can be tribalistic forms of that coming together that I think are inappropriate. But yeah, no, you're exactly right that they can be a wonderful way to bring people together. I mean, I remember when I came from Canada, where I grew up and did my undergraduate work, and there's a sports culture there, but it's nothing on the scale, except for hockey, of American sports culture, especially at the college level. And I was just blown away when I showed up at Indiana University, which is in Bloomington, which is a lovely small town in southern Indiana. And it's got these huge, sports facilities that would be worthy of any professional sports teams, in Canada. And it really, was a wonderful unifying thing that we are, part of this community, and our team is doing well, and oh darn, we lost, and there's lots of fun things to talk about, and tailgating parties and so forth. So
right, I think many of us would like to be able to recreate that kind of feeling with a core of ideas where everyone can get so excited about it and be true believers. And
ideas are much more abstract, and it's always a smaller percentage of people who are interested in them.
Unfortunately.
So it's an cultural education project. Now, I'm modestly optimistic because I think we are a lot more educated. There's a lot more people who understand the importance of ideas than, say, 50 years ago or a century ago or 2 centuries ago. I think it's a very slow cultural evolution process. A century and a half ago, a majority of the population still was illiterate. Right? And while we bemoan the state of much contemporary education, our literacy numbers are up significantly. So
knowledge is obviously an important ingredient in that, and of course, just 100 years ago, 95% of people lived on farms, and we've had these massive population shifts in terms of urban to rural to urban, as well as
Right.
farming to manufacturing, and all these are basically taking place in a relatively frictionless, at least not a revolutionary kind of happening with the
On a historical
system.
scale, it's revolutionary, the rate at which it's occurred. But yes, we've been able to achieve that, right, without all kinds of political revolutions, right, and nastiness. So, in the space of a century, now we've got, tens of thousands of people who are teachers and doctors and lawyers and engineers and computer scientists, right, and so forth, very fulfilling professions, whereas, 2 centuries ago, they all would be stuck on the farm, right, or peasants. And it's typically a small percentage of people who genuinely find their vocation, right, in farming. So we have lots of opportunities for people.
And people that, really don't get upset when they look back and they see this transition from all the people working in agriculture to going to manufacturing. They're unable to appreciate that the people in manufacturing are now making a transition to another kind of a service economy, and all this outsourcing and using labor that's far less expensive in foreign lands for manufacturing is causing the same kind of phenomenon. And yet, obviously, we know of a lot of political issues that arise, and we need to create jobs here, and we won't have any manufacturing. Well, there were, I'm sure, people saying, well, we won't have any farming, we're letting all these people move to the city. And of course, that's a big problem. Like in China, they're actually trying to discourage people from moving to these urban areas and keep them on the farm, so to speak. And yet, that kind of a transition is what's happening in manufacturing today from the United States, and it's very politically unpopular to a big extent.
Well, I think a lot of that's just basic, economic education. Once I think you look at the numbers, how food production goes, that's basically a commodity now, right? That's not difficult. The manufacturing and all of the other industries. And letting people gravitate, right, to where the opportunities are is win-win, right, for everybody involved. So I'm not too worried about the economics is clear on that. So I think it's just a marketing education issue, and we're just in the midst of revolutionary times, historically speaking, and it takes a generation or two for people to catch up with the curve. But just to put it bluntly, here we are, 2013. Suppose a young man or a young woman now graduating from college. I always like to put it at the individual level as much as possible, and just say, or high school, right, or whatever. Say, how many career options are open to that person in 2013? Hey, you can't put a number to it, right? And if you don't like any of them, well, then just make up your own, right? Become an entrepreneur, right? But just go back 1 century, and you've got a young man or a young woman graduating from high school or college in 1913. How many career options are open to that person? Well, still a pretty significant number for the young men, a much smaller number, maybe 15 or 20 careers open to women. And so in 1 century, to go from very limited number of options to the average individual to unlimited career options, that's enormously wonderful. And if we go back 2 centuries ago, well, my last name is Hicks. I come from a long line of farmers, right, Canadian farmers. However many generations ago, I would have been a farmer. Right? So, and I wouldn't have had the choice, right? And the choices that I did have in our wonderful modern society.
Yeah, society was much more static, and of course that's the way the rulers liked it, and those monarchs and other things.
Many of them, sure.
Looking to have
many of them, yes.
Thing. Well, you talked about the fact that you think that ideas are a more important part of life today. People are more concerned and aware of ideas. Maybe we could talk a little bit about Ayn Rand and the ideas which she has helped. I don't know if the popularize is the right word, but of course...
well, popularizing is a huge part of it.
I mean, it's... I don't know how popular they are. I wish we were more popular than they are. But, of course, we've had 2 editions of a movie that have come out as basically following her, what I consider to be her most important novel, Atlas Shrugged. But maybe you could... for our viewing audience, maybe just kind of condense a little bit about what you feel Rand's major contributions to the area of philosophy and knowledge of society are
Yeah. Well, certainly,
being felt.
one important thing is this issue of popularizing. I mean, Rand is a public intellectual, and part of what she does almost right without equal. I mean, here's a classic American immigrant success story, right? Came from Russia, knew very little English right when she got here, had a successful career eventually in Hollywood, right, and became a best-selling American novelist and a household name among the thinking public, right? Very polarized, obviously, thinking public. Some people think she's great, other people think she's just awful. But she has a very inspiring story, right? Just in her biography, right, all by itself. And the fact that she took the philosophical novel, right, or the novel of ideas, using the novel form as a vehicle for developing the big human themes, and did that so well, right, such that over 50 years later, right, her books are selling so well, right, and movies are being based on that. That is an enormous philosophical, educational accomplishment, right, for one person, right, to pull off. Then to speak more specifically, I mean, Rand was, in the first part of her career, primarily a novelist, and then fairly explicitly a philosophical novelist, and then she did a certain amount of systematic philosophy, nonfiction writing, and cultural commentary, and so on. So the second part of your question was, if we just focus on the philosophical issues, what are her accomplishments there? I think, in my judgment as a professional philosopher, what Rand accomplished, right, was a very well worked out sketch of a full philosophical system. That is to say, she articulated on almost all of the important philosophical issues a position clearly and in an integrated fashion, so that the issues in metaphysics are integrated with the issues in epistemology and human nature and ethics and politics and aesthetics, right, and so forth. So a well worked out, coherent philosophical system was sketched. Now, also though, as a professional philosopher, it's not simply to state what the system is, but all of the arguments for all of the components in all of the systems. And here I think there is a lot of work to do. In some areas, Rand did a lot of work. For example, she has a nicely developed theory of concept formation, which is a critical issue in epistemology. I think her essays in ethics, the foundations of ethics, sometimes what we call meta-ethics, are very well done. More work to be done there, but very well done and at the highest standard for philosophical work. In political philosophy, she's not original, from what I can tell. Instead, what she does is she takes arguments that have been very well done in the liberal tradition, the real liberal tradition, right, going back to the Enlightenment. Yes, and making a nice presentation of those. I think perhaps her most original area is in her aesthetics, the importance that art plays in all of our lives. And developing a philosophical theory of art. It's probably the least appreciated part of her philosophy. Much more attention has been given to the other areas, but she is highly original and highly powerful, right, in that area as well. So that's what I would say. I would say she took a number of positions in human nature. And a lot of that still needs to be worked out. But the reason why that needs to be worked out is human biology and our understanding of human psychology are still very youthful, and what can be said there has to be integrated with those developments as well.
What are the major myths that are surrounding Ayn Rand or keep her from being more well received in the community at large?
Well, I think anytime you have a radical thinker, that person, I think this is what philosophers and people who are important thinkers have to do. They have to find what the fundamental issues are and hit those issues hard. And Rand does that. And so that means that she's always pushing people's buttons, right, in a very deep way. And in many cases, since philosophical issues are so deep, they are so important to us, but also they are in many cases very abstract and difficult for people to understand, that people react often in an uninformed fashion or in a visceral reaction. So if you just take Rand doing what any good philosopher should do, so taking up issues of the existence of God, is there really a God, right, or not, taking a position, taking a hard position, and really attacking hard, right, her intellectual opponents. That means that people who are on the other side of the debate, since she was not religious, she was an atheist, right, are going to really feel attacked. And also, if they are not themselves fully conversant with what all of the issues are that are being put on the table, then and exactly what her position is, then they're going to filter it through their own understanding of the issues, right? So they will have their preconception of what it is not to be a religious person, right? And you put all kinds of negative things in that category. So Rand is not a religious person, therefore she must, you know, just to be silly, you know, eat little babies for breakfast, right, and dance with the devil at midnight, right? Or in political philosophy, you know, if you are an intellectual and you think that socialism is a good idea, that socialism is a moral ideal, and during the 20th century you think the Soviet Union is a very wonderful moral beacon and showing the world where the future, right, should go, and Rand is coming along and harshly attacking socialism, harshly attacking the Soviet Union, and then very forcefully advocating free market capitalism, the other extreme, well, right, people are going to feel that as a very strong attack. If they don't understand Rand's, in some cases, nuanced arguments for free market capitalism, then they're just going to dismiss and attack. And then also they're going to filter their understanding of the arguments that she's making through kind of socialist filters, right? So capitalism just means, you know, rich people kicking widows and orphans whenever they feel like it, and so that must be what Rand is in favor of, right?
The old definition that in capitalism, man exploits man, but in socialism, the opposite is true. Anyway,
right.
We have to be thinking about closing up here. Could you do just a really, is the school of free market economics represented in the Austrians and Rand, are they compatible and friends or foes in the intellectual world?
Yeah, good question.
Just a short time we have for that because we need to wrap it up here in about 30 seconds.
My view is that there's a mixture, or a mixed answer is necessary. Obviously, Rand is very much in favor of free market, right, economics, very much in favor of a broadly constitutionally limited democratic republican, right, politics. And so she does have a natural ally with those economists, whether neoclassical or Austrian, who are in favor of that approach to economics and the associated political, right, stuff that goes with it. Where there are differences come when you get more into the philosophical issues, right? And so, but here it's difficult because even if you take the Austrians, for example, you know, the philosophical underpinnings, say, of Menger's Austrianism is more Aristotelian.
Yeah. I wish we had another whole program. I'm sorry to cut you off.
So we really are running out of time.
Wrap it up and run out of time. I think we could do a whole program on maybe that question alone. We certainly appreciate you coming to Houston and being with us today.
Thanks,
and
David.
Look forward to hearing about your center and hopefully wishing you the great success in this, because it's a battle of obviously of ideas, and
right.
I sure appreciate the work you're doing to keep those concepts in front of people and hopefully change a lot of minds that we can create a more equitable and prosperous society.
All right, well, thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, very good. So we can